Hello, Bourbon Real Talk listeners. Randy Sullivan here with a beginner's guide to how to start off your whiskey collection. So I noticed out there in the Facebook whiskey group world, one of the most popular questions that gets asked is a new person saying, hey, what should I have in my closet, right? I don't know what to buy. I'm new. I'm getting into whiskey. And so I thought this would be an interesting kind of a beginner's guide type content for us to do. So we're going to talk about some whiskeys that I think you should be able to find on the shelves in your area, about what they cost, what you should expect. And also we're going to talk about some things that you might want to avoid. So let's start off with that first. What do we want to avoid? Well, if you're new to whiskey, you probably don't have the breadth of knowledge of the history of all the distilleries and all of those things that come in handy when you're perusing the shelves. And there's something out there called a non-distiller producer. And that is a company that owns a whiskey brand, and they are buying whiskey from other companies that actually produce it, and then they're putting it in their bottle. And sometimes they age it in their facility, sometimes they distill it an extra time, sometimes they age it in a barrel that used to have something else in it. They do all different types of things. But this is an area of the market that is trying to take advantage of you, the new consumer. And what they want to do is they want to go buy a whiskey that, say, is normally $42, and then they're going to put it in their bottle and they're going to sell it for $180. And that is kind of what gets me upset, because I'm excited that you're excited about whiskey, and I don't want the market to be taking advantage of that. So a couple of examples of that would be these guys right here. So we've got Cream of Kentucky, okay? And the one that I have is the 11.5-year bottle, and Kentucky Owl Bourbon. I believe, based on my research, that both of these bottles come from the same distillery, and they have releases of this type of whiskey that are routinely in the $40 range, and both of these bottles were well over $100. So if you have not really heard of the distillery before, it's not a name that you heard growing up, if you're new, I'd recommend that you probably stay away from it. So what are some ones that you could be looking for if you're looking to get your whiskey collection started? Well, we'll start off with the easiest one for me, and that is going to be this guy right here, 1792. This distillery started production on this location in 1879. I mean, they've been there forever. They have a decommissioned vodka still that's in the center of their building that was put in by the federal government so that they could make grain neutral spirit for the war effort in World War II. That's how long these guys have been around. And they make an excellent product. Their base product is this guy right here. It's the 1792 small batch. And this is pretty easy to find. I think that it's any decent liquor store is going to have it. This one is 93.7, but still respectable. Along those lines, I try to avoid anything that's below 90, because usually those are not necessarily meant to be a neat drink. Those are a lot of times produced more for somebody who's going to be mixing, maybe not paying as much attention to the flavors that they're trying to pick out. But 1792 has their small batch, that's the 93.7 proof. They have their bottled and bond, which is 100 proof. And then they have another guy that's called a full proof. And full proof just means that after it gets done aging, they only proof it down to what it was before they put it in the barrel. And so these guys have varying costs. I think they're around $30 to $45 in most areas. All very good whiskey, and something that I feel like if you got that, you wouldn't be disappointed. What should you expect from that whiskey? Well, I always get a medicinal cherry. And what I mean by that is, like, it tastes a little bit like a cherry cough drop or a cherry cough syrup. It's got that cherry flavor, but there's that medicine flavor that goes with it. And it's also pretty common to get a banana runts flavor from this. So a lot of whiskeys do have a banana flavor in them, but it's more along the lines of banana runts or banana Laffy Taffy, not like a ripe banana. But those are pretty common flavor profiles for 1792, and something that you might want to check out. Now, next in our lineup of things that you may want to pick up, we're going to talk about Maker's Mark. Now, Maker's Mark is, I mean, almost ubiquitous. You can find it at any bar, any liquor store, characterized by this red dripping wax. They actually have trademark protection on that, so you're not allowed to put red dripping wax on anything, or you're going to get a cease and desist letter from Maker's Mark. But this is their base level product. Mine actually has some writing on the front because I'm using a bunch of Maker's Mark to do a long-term study on the effects of oxygen on whiskey, as well as light and heat. Since we all sometimes have so many bottles open, we don't drink them very fast. Does that affect the flavor? So we're doing a test on that. But Maker's Mark is an excellent product. The one thing that's different about Maker's Mark compared to most other Kentucky bourbons is that it doesn't have any rye in the combination of grains that it's made from, what we call a mash bill. Most whiskeys from Kentucky are going to be somewhere around 80% corn and 10-15% rye and 5-10% malted barley. And the rye is what they call the flavor grain. For Maker's Mark, the flavor grain is wheat. And so it's a little bit softer. It's a little bit sweeter on the approach. Sometimes it has a little bit of a citrus flavor, more of like an orange zest or an orange peel type of a flavor on it. And this is really easy to find and relatively inexpensive. For a shelfer, it is on the higher end. It was meant to be a luxury brand when it was released. But this bottle is typically going to be aged for 4 to 6 years or so in a new charred oak cask. And it's a good bottle to pick up. They also have another line that you may want to pick up. It's a little bit more expensive, closer to the $65, $70 range. But this is called their Private Select. And this bottle is the same as this bottle, except they take different types of wood that have different flavor compounds inside them. And after they're done making this whiskey, they submerge pieces of wood that have been what they call toasted, where they cook it for an extended period of time and caramelize those wood sugars and all that stuff down into the barrel, and they make this whiskey. And on the back, it'll tell you which pieces of wood were put into this particular barrel because somebody picked that wood combination, and that's why it's called a Private Select. So that might be something that you want to check out. The next whiskey I'd recommend that you check out is the tried and true Wild Turkey 101. Now, Wild Turkey does have an 80 proof version of this. I don't recommend it unless you're just going to be making, bourbon and cokes or something like that. But if you're looking for something that's pretty easy to find and really inexpensive, I think this bottle's only around $20. And this is some really high quality whiskey. I think that the average age for this is also in that same, 6, 7, 8 year range. And it is amazing juice. The problem is it's so inexpensive and so widely available that there are some out there in the whiskey world that kind of poo-poo on the idea of Wild Turkey 101, like it's not a high quality product, but believe me, it is a high quality product. And there were years where Japan actually kept Wild Turkey afloat because the Japanese realized how high quality this bourbon was, and they were exporting a ton of Wild Turkey to Japan, and it really supported Wild Turkey through the lean years when bourbon wasn't doing so good in the United States. This whiskey is one that I really love. You can sip it neat. It's inexpensive enough that if you want to put some water in it and some ice, you don't have to feel guilty about that. If you want to mix it, you don't have to feel guilty about that. But it's got a really nice cherry flavor to it. Like, I don't know, it's not as much of a medicinal cherry, it's more of a dark cherry flavor. Lots of caramel and toffee flavors. Just a really high quality whiskey for a good price. So next up on the list, we have one of my favorites. This is Four Roses. This is their small batch. So Four Roses does have a lower level product that I think it even comes in a plastic bottle. I haven't bought it in a long time, but it's the yellow label. That's one that, again, probably more for people who want to mix. But this product right here, usually around $30. Really high quality, excellent whiskey. And this one is characterized by more of a floral, fruity component, which I really enjoy. It's such a bold, bright flavor. It kind of steps away from some of the more traditional tasting bourbons, in my opinion. But still super high quality bourbon, not like a finished product or anything like that. Nothing but that level of sweetness. But just a really good product, in my opinion, to have around on your shelf. The next one I want to recommend to you guys is Knob Creek. So a lot of people, especially if you're newer, you may not know this, but Jim Beam makes a number of different products. They make Jim Beam, they make Knob Creek, they make Booker's, they make Baker's, and they make Basil Hayden. And Knob Creek is a premium version of Jim Beam. It's got a little bit more age on it and typically a little bit more proof. So they've got Knob Creek variations that are 100 proof, 120 proof. Really excellent whiskey, and honestly, it's one of the best values in the marketplace in terms of age and quality. And so this was one that I would definitely recommend that you put on your shelf. Now, I thought about leaving this next distillery out, but it's such a large distillery and it makes so many other products that we're all out there looking for if you're getting into the whiskey world, that I wanted to include it and talk about it a little bit. So the next one is Buffalo Trace Distillery. So this is a bottle of their base level product. It's just called Buffalo Trace Bourbon. And it's an excellent tasting whiskey. They actually make bourbons out of 3 different mash bills. They have Buffalo Trace mash bill 1 and 2, and then they have their wheat recipe. And they make a ton of different bourbons with it. So it used to be that this was just a shelf product, that Blanton's was just a shelf product, that Elmer T. Lee was just a shelf product. But unfortunately, they've become super difficult to find. So Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 1, they make this product out of it. They make Stagg Jr. out of it. They make George T. Stagg. They make E.H. Taylor out of it. They make just a ton of different products. And the way that I would describe its flavor would be, if it's one of the younger versions, like Buffalo Trace, I taste a medicinal cherry. And if it's one of the older versions, I get more of a dark cherry. The medicinal flavor starts to fade away. I don't get as much medicine flavor, say, in the George T. Stagg as I do in the Buffalo Trace. And it also starts to develop some more complex, like coffee note flavors, chocolate flavors, like a sweet pipe tobacco. Very interesting whiskey. Buffalo Trace Mash Bill 2 is more characterized in the mid-palate by almost a tropical fruit flavor, like a mango or guava, pineapple, and sometimes peaches. That's one of the only whiskeys that I consistently get peach on. And so the reason why I almost left this out isn't because it's not good whiskey or because it's even expensive. It's because the influence of Pappy Van Winkle and the Buffalo Trace Antique Collection in the collector world has caused virtually every product that Buffalo Trace makes to go allocated. And since I'm talking to you about putting together a kind of a beginner bar for somebody who wants to start collecting whiskey, I didn't want to make recommendations that were going to be super difficult to find. But if you do ever find a Buffalo Trace product, I recommend you pick it up. They really don't have any bad products, and at retail, they're always a good value. Next, I want to talk with you about Heaven Hill Distillery. Now, Heaven Hill has just been an amazing producer of whiskey for a very long time. They have a lot of brands that they produce for. I think I've heard numbers in the 50s or so. But their main brand that I'm going to recommend to you if you're a new whiskey drinker is Elijah Craig. So Elijah Craig Small Batch, it's a 94 proof bourbon. It's got excellent flavor. I'd say the main tasting component that I get out of most Heaven Hill products is a little bit of a nuttiness, like a peanut butter flavor. There's also some fruit characteristics in there as well, but this product is usually around $28, $32, very drinkable. It's typically got some pretty good age on it. It used to be a 10-year or a 12-year age stated product. I'm told now that most of the barrels that go into this are somewhere between that 8 and 12-year range, so still got some good age on it. Another product that they make that's even more accessible is called Larceny. Larceny is, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. There was a revenuer post-prohibition named Johnny Fitzgerald who had the keys to the distillery, but he was known to steal whiskey out of the barrel while he was working because some people say he might have had a little bit of a drinking problem, so they named a brand after him called Larceny since he stole whiskey. And this bottle, I believe, is around $22. Excellent flavor, but again, highly characterized by that peanut flavor. And then something else that I think would be interesting for you to grab if you end up with, a small collection would be an Evan Williams single barrel. Now there are other Evan Williams products that they make that are lower level products, but this Evan Williams single barrel is widely considered one of the better values in whiskey. Of all of the whiskeys that I'm recommending to you, I believe this is the only one that's below 90 proof. The single barrel is bottled at 86.6 proof, but again, excellent whiskey. May not always be able to find it. And this is one that I have seen in stores where the store thought that it was rare, so they marked it up far beyond what the manufacturer suggested retail price was. But this is typically around $30 here where I live. So if you see one of these, I would pick this up and just have it around as a daily drinker. Now this last recommendation, I almost didn't include. So far, everything that we've talked about has been produced in Kentucky. Kentucky is definitely the mecca for bourbon production. Undoubtedly, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world of bourbon production is the state of Kentucky. But just on the north side of Kentucky, just on the other side of the river, literally up against the river, is a distillery that's been in operation there since 1850, and that is MGPI. Now, MGPI is an interesting brand because, or an interesting producer, because they didn't have any of their own brands for most of the time that they've been in production. They made whiskey and aged it up, and then they'd sell it to other companies, the people that we were talking about before, non-distiller producers, who would bottle that whiskey and brand it the way that they wanted to brand it. And recently, they discovered that, hey, there are companies out there that are, building up in just a few years, selling our product that we put all the effort into, and then they're selling their company for $160 million or whatever. And MGPI is owned by a publicly traded company. So there's a lot of pressure on them to keep revenues up. So they decided to start some of their own brands, and their bourbon brand is called George Remus Bourbon. And if you know anything about George Remus, he was a famous bootlegger during Prohibition. Super interesting background. Started off as a pharmacist, then became a well-known defense attorney, defending murderers and all kinds of stuff. Later in life, used his legal knowledge and money that he made from his practice to actually start a bootlegging operation during Prohibition, became fabulously wealthy. The book Great Gatsby is written after his true life story, and he did actually murder his wife in the streets in broad daylight and went and turned himself in and got himself off on a temporary insanity charge. Super crazy backstory. But they named their bourbon after him. He hit the head of his, or the center of his bourbon empire was right around where the distillery is. And so I think it's got some interesting history. The interesting thing about getting this bourbon is that it's relatively affordable and it's pretty widely distributed. So you should be able to find these, and they're not super expensive. And this is whiskey that if they had aged it up a little bit more and sold it to other non-distiller producers, that whiskey would have been sold at a much higher price than what you're paying to get this bottle for. And so this is kind of a value play. Not Kentucky bourbon, technically, just on the other side of the border, but these people have played such a role in the run-up of bourbon and the growth of bourbon brands that I'd be remiss if I did not at least include them in there. So that's your lineup, people. Hopefully you get out there and you get some of these bottles and you try them. And if you have any questions or comments, you can throw them in down below. If you want more information about Bourbon Real Talk, you can reach us at bourbonrealtalk.com. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram /Bourbon Real Talk. You can look up our YouTube channel on youtube.com/Bourbon Real Talk. And if you woke up this morning and you're unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you, and I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk. This content is being brought to you by the Bourbon Real Talk American Whiskey Aroma Kit. This is a tool that I put together to help all you whiskey aficionados out there develop your palates. You can sit down with the vials and train your senses, or you can sit down with a great dram and break that whiskey down to its components. If you have any interest of purchasing a kit of your own, head on over to bourbonrealtalk.com /shop and pick one up. Thank you for listening.